Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are getting off the Bruce train, kinda, though I'm sure he's going to be a big part of this discussion. I've got Robert Lawson, my new friend, who has a new book out that I think people who love Bruce are going to be interested in. Robert, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here, Jesse.
Yeah. So, Solidarity Forever, the art and soul of Stevie Van Zandt. I can't wait to deep dive on why you wanted to write the book and to get a little bit about it. But in the meantime, tell us a little about yourself.
I've been a huge Steven fan for many years and just in general, a big music guy, big collector, and one of those kind of music nerds who makes top 10 lists every year and top five guitar players and top 10 live albums. This is actually a filing cabinet just full of documents of that kind of nerd stuff, favorite jazz piano players, all kinds of stuff like that. So having a lot of that raw data helps when it comes to writing a book like this.
Very nice. I always like to start at the beginning. Talk about where did you grow up and what kind of music was your family listening to when you were growing up?
When I was a kid, I guess for the first 8 or 10 years of my life, I lived in Winnipeg, Manitoba, here in Canada, which Bruce and Steven played last night for the first time ever.
I am friends with someone on Twitter, aka X, Winnipeg for Springsteen, and so I was so happy that they got the show, and it sounded like it was a great show.
Right. So growing up, and then I moved to Toronto when I was 9 or 10 or something. But growing up, my father was a big music collector. He still is, still buys vinyl all the time. Just this morning, he was texting me about some new Wayne Shorter vinyl repressings that he picked up. So there was always a lot of music around, but also a lot of kind of talk about trying to figure out why it's so important to us. And like when I was a kid, I just grew up with you'd be in the back seat of the car and the latest issue of Rolling Stone would be next to me. I'm talking about like the late 70s. He was subscribing or buying every issue of Rolling Stone back then. So being around music and being around records specifically was a big part of my childhood for sure.
When I find that most people generally fall into two categories that I have as my guests: the people that embrace their parents' music, and then as they grew up, they expanded their horizon but just added to it. And then the others that could not stand their parents' music. And then when they hit 35, they go, that guy, Johnny Cash, my dad liked a lot, he's pretty good. So it sounds like you were the first category.
Yeah, like I remember when I was a kid, if my dad upgraded a version of an album that he had, he would give me the old one, and it was never what I wanted. Like in ni- like in 1978, I just wanted Kiss and Cheap Trick records.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, "No, you need to hear this." So I was pretty young when like 12 years old or something, where he's giving me like King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King or the Hollies' greatest hits and a lot of records like that and jazz albums. So he would just be giving me these records and saying, "You'll grow into them." And a lot of them as a kid, I was like, I don't want to listen to Larry Coryell, some weird live jazz album at the Village Vanguard. I wanted the Peter Criss solo album. But I did grow into them. And I remember being at his place and he wanted to play me a new live album that had just come out. And it was Peter Gabriel plays live. So I never would have heard that on my own. So yeah, I definitely he also took me to my very first concert, which was the Cheap Trick was the opening act and the headliner was Kiss in the summer of 1977 on the Love Gun tour. So I did get into a lot of music that way. He also bought me this book. It was a British book called The Encyclopedia of Rock, and I would just read it front to cover all the time. I didn't know who hardly any of these bands were, but I would just read it because I was just really interested in it. And that was the book that I read, and I was blown away that Clarence Clemens was once a member of James Brown's Famous Flames, which of course is not true. But
Yes,
but it was in that book. I think he gave me that book in 82 or something, so I just took it all as gospel.
that's funny. When you were able to have your own spending cash, what kind of music were you buying?
Yeah, I like the same. I definitely an early album for me was Cheap Trick's Heaven Tonight. I know I bought
Okay.
that with my own like newspaper money or something. So mostly that kind of stuff. And then I would, like a lot of kids growing up in the 70s, I ventured out to a lot of the 70s kind of arena hard rock. So Blue Oyster
Yeah.
Cult and Nazareth, Aerosmith, all those bands who were really big and really vital in the 70s.
So I usually ask this, and so I'm going to ask it a joint way. I will ask, can you remember when you first discovered Bruce Springsteen? And can you articulate what about his music spoke to you? So I'm going to compound that with Little Steven. And I don't know if that's the same time or maybe a different time.
It's close. And
Okay.
I and actually now I'm glad that I mentioned that British book, the Encyclopedia of Rock, because I don't know if I was in grade 7 or 8 or something, and there was a guy in my class who was a little older. I think he got held back, and he just kept talking about Bruce Springsteen. And no, we were kids, but no one in the class knew who that was, and I only knew who it was because I'd read that entry in that encyclopedia, the one
Yeah.
with the with the mistake about Clarence. So I was like, I was the only one who could say, no, I know a little bit about that guy. I hadn't heard the music. So this guy kept telling me, oh, you got to see him live and he's this and he's that and whatever. And then I actually do remember being in my bedroom listening to the radio and them saying, coming up next, Bruce Springsteen. And they played the song Born to Run. It was the first time I'd ever heard his music. And as soon as it was over, I was like, I'm going to the mall. And I bought the Born to Run album. So that was like an 81 or 82.
Okay.
So then Nebraska came out and that was a little weird because I was so into a lot of the louder and party kind of rocking songs on the river. Of course, now Nebraska's the masterpiece.
Sure.
And so when Little Steven put out his first album and he wasn't really too much on my radar. He came to Toronto in February 83. I was too young to go and I didn't know his music actually. So
Hmm.
it didn't mean too much to me, but I guess the week after the Toronto concert, he was interviewed on a local music kind of magazine show that I used to watch religiously every weekend. So they interviewed him, and I thought, well, that's interesting. That's the guy from the E Street Band. But then they played the video for the song Forever. And I was like, I'm going to the mall.
And what about, obviously, Bruce is known as a live artist, but what about Little Steven? What about that song spoke to you?
I was a real big Motown guy when I was a kid. Like, those are some of the records that my dad was
Yeah.
passing on to me. So I was collecting a lot of Motown records. And that song really hit me. I was like, wow, this is like a Smokey Robinson. The song's actually based on Tears of a Clown, the intro and the way that the baritone sax comes in. If you listen to them both back to, no, it's
Yeah.
not a cover of Tears of a Clown, but it's if you mapped out Tears of a Clown, that's Forever. I think it was just like that. It's got this great upbeat melody. It's got this, I love his vocals. I always liked the twangy or kind of vocals, the nasally. I'm a big Bob Dylan and Ron Wood and Keith Richards and all those guys who sing like that. And
Hmm.
then when I got the album, it just exploded for me. This mix of like Keith Richards style guitar, and then you got Motown style horns and a Dylan vocal singing. It just really came together for me. And immediately, Men Without Women, his first album, like I loved every track on it and every lick and every drum beat. And I just played the thing and studied it to death. At this point, I probably own like a dozen or 15 different versions of Men Without Women.
Just right. You got an album and cassette and CD and just,
The Japanese pressing, the US, Canadian, UK, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, you could say that for almost every Steven album. I have especially like the first three or four. All of those I have at least like 12 to 15 different international copies, as well as yes, CD, vinyl, cassette. In some cases, I'll have the vine or the cassette from multiple countries.
Obviously a Bruce fan, but by Steven is definitely your muse, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm definitely not a guy who's like just going to little Steven concerts like hoping Bruce shows up. I actually hope Bruce doesn't show up because I don't want people to just freak out because Bruce is there. Like I'm there for Steven's music. Like first and foremost, I go to Bruce concerts just to see Steven.
That is awesome. So when as you're getting into this deep dive, talk to me a little bit like how many times have you seen Steven perform live, either with Bruce or without?
That's a little tricky because, like I said, the first time he played Toronto in
Yeah.
'83, I didn't really know who he was, and I don't think I could have gone into a bar at that point. When he came for the Voice of America album, and that was July 10th, 1984, I did go to that. Met him before the show and after again. Met the whole band actually. Um,
Tell me
in
how that happened.
Actually, it was a general admission show at a small theater. And because of general admission, me and my friends and my sister was with me. We were just sitting on the steps of this venue,
Hmm.
waiting for the doors to open. And this rental van slowly drove past us. And I saw a black guy with a blonde mohawk through the tinted windows, who is Steven's bass player.
Right.
So we just followed the van around the corner. And when they got out, we just started talking to them and took pictures and got them to sign stuff and then did the same after the show as well. But for 87, for his third album, he didn't do too many headlining uh, concerts in North America. And he didn't come back to Toronto as a headliner. He did open for U2 in a massive, I don't know, 85,000 people outdoor stadium. I went to it, and then I went
Hmm.
to see him in Buffalo a couple days later. But he didn't play solo in Toronto again until 2017. So that was always tough to see him too many times. I saw Bruce in '85. Steven wasn't there. I saw Bruce in '88 a couple times. Steven wasn't there. When the E Street Band reunited, they played two shows in Toronto in May of 2000, and I met Steven backstage before both of those shows. We spent some time together, and then I would just see him occasionally. I went to San Jose on the Rising tour, and I saw Steven backstage, and we spent some time together talking. And it just kept going like that. Whenever he would come to town with the E Street Band, I would see him for a little bit before the shows. And then when he finally went solo again in 2017, he invited me to see the sound check before the show. And so it's just been like a semi kind of regular thing that we do. I just saw him like I guess a week and a half ago when I presented him a copy of the book, and that was great to be with him again.
So let's talk about that. Tell me the origin story of the book.
I was looking for a new project to do, and it just seemed natural. Like I said, I've got tons of raw data already. Like I've got files and files of I think it was like 25 or more years ago. I listened to every little Steven bootleg cassette I had, and I wrote a little review of it. So like,
Okay.
what are you going to do with that? That's just sitting in the file cabinet here. And I would just compare lyrics, and I was just researching for decades, doing this kind of stuff. It was something I was looking for a project, something to keep me busy, and it almost seemed too natural. Like I already know more about this guy than most people do or most people would want to. So it really just seemed like a natural fit.
And I remember I was at a book signing for Brad Meltzer, the mystery novelist, and he talked about that every time he does a thriller, a mystery, he has to do tons of research. When he writes comics, it's just all in his head. And that's an oversimplification, right? But when you love a topic that much, it is just this is truly a labor of love, right?
I was looking forward to expanding on the raw deep data that I already had and looking forward to what new things I would discover. Because now
Hmm.
I'm actively working on a project. Now I'm actively researching it. And I'm also interviewing a lot of people for the band. So it's not just all of my previous research and all my album reviews and concert reviews and all that
Hmm.
kind of stuff when I go to shows, I tend to take notes and I make a
Yeah.
list of what songs were from what albums and all that kind of geeky stuff. To put all that together, that's a rough version of a book. But then you start adding to it, you start really digging deep, and then you start talking to some people who have insight into the recording sessions or songwriting or just any aspects of it, really. And it really starts to build from there.
Did this was not your first book, correct?
It's my fourth, actually.
Okay. Talk a little bit about your earlier works, and then I'm going to get back to talking more about Little Steven.
My first book was about the Scottish band Nazareth. And I guess I should say my first three books, they're all what's considered listener's guides. So each chapter is just about an album, and I just like really purely talk about the music. The Stephen book is like that, but then it's got a biography angle to it as well. My first book was about Nazareth from Scotland, a band I really grew up listening to. I thought they were just as big as like Aerosmith or anybody. When I was a kid, I thought Nazareth were like the biggest band in the world. I didn't realize that they actually weren't that big, but they were pretty big for a few years.
I graduated high school in 1977, so Nazareth was pretty big for me.
Sure. My second book
Uh,
was about Cheap Trick.
hmm.
Always another favorite band of mine from the 70s. I love all their 70s albums and a lot of the 80s and synths. And then for my third book, I wrote about a Canadian band, Burton Cummings and the Guess Who.
Yeah,
What all four books have in common is that they don't have a lot of books already written about them. When I wrote my
yeah,
book about Nazareth, there were no Nazareth books. And when I wrote my book about Cheap Trick, there was only one, and it had been out already for many years. So it didn't go up to as current as my book. There's been at least one Cheap Trick book since then. And
hmm.
with the Guess Who, there was only one book ever, and that was like from the mid 90s, and it's out of print, and you can't get it anymore. It's like as much as I would love to write a book about Miles Davis, there's already dozens of books about him, and I don't think I could come up with a really unique take on that. And part of it has to be an artist that I think I can listen to for 2 to 3 years straight
Yeah.
and devote my life to just doing that, but also somebody who there isn't already a ton of books out there about them.
So you're thinking about what's your next project, and was there a road to Damascus moment where you said, "I've got all this research about Little Steven anyway. Why don't I pursue that?"
I don't remember exactly how I landed on it. I was probably just like walking around looking at my collection and trying to figure out I don't remember exactly how that clicked, but I'm glad it did.
Yeah. What When you decided to write this, talk about the concept in your mind. You mentioned this is a little bit about music, a little bit about listening as you've done other things, but you wanted to throw in the biography. So talk to me a little bit about this.
I definitely trace a lot of the important aspects of his life, and I talk about his childhood a little bit, but it is still broken down career wise. So I'm not really interested in, and this applies for all my books in my life. I'm not really interested in a lot of the drama behind the scenes. I wouldn't read a book like that, something that's just about groupies and going to rehab and stuff like that. That really
Yeah.
doesn't interest me. I'm interested in the music. So all of my books are real deep dives about the music. With Steven, you just get some other stuff because I want to cover as much of his career as possible. But still, I leave out parts of his life that I don't think necessarily need to be public or need to be on the printed page. That's stuff that maybe me and my buddies talk about when we go out for pints or something, but I don't have to talk about that kind of stuff. There's enough interesting stuff for me about the music. But I cover like live concerts and TV appearances and videos and bootlegs and radio broadcasts and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of music talk in it, and I go really deep on a lot of the stuff. But I'm going to mention like when he got married because Little Richard officiated it when all the E Street Band were there and Gary U.S. Bonds was there. So it's almost anything in Stephen's life has music involved in it somehow.
What, as you started doing the research, is there anything that surprised you about this?
One thing that I'd wondered for a long time, and I never mentioned to anybody, I don't think, but I really wondered for a long time what Stephen's real name was. And I didn't know if I would ever find that out. And I didn't know if, since then, I've mentioned it to a few people, and they don't even understand the question of what I'm
Hmm.
talking about. What I'm talking about is that when he was very young, like six or something, his mother remarried and she married a man named William Van Zandt. And that's how a 100% Italian American guy has a Dutch surname. I was always curious. His mother's maiden name is Lento. So some people will occasionally refer to him as Stephen Lento. And there was a period when he was a kid when he was called that. I don't know if he was legally changed to that. But for a while I used to wonder what his real name was.
Hmm.
And I found out, and it's in there, and he knows that I know. It was not necessarily maybe newsworthy for most people. That was the level that I was real curious about. Here's a guy that I love so much, and I know everything about him. I don't even know his real name.
Did you tell him in advance you were thinking about doing this, or you wanted to be independent and just do the research and go for it?
Yeah, I started it independently, and so at that, it's going to happen no matter what. I would like to have him involved. I would like to have as many people as possible involved. But if I can't get them involved, I think it's still going to have a certain quality that will make it a worthwhile project for me. So I had a lot of it done, like the majority of it done, and I had interviewed a whole bunch of people for it and before I pitched it to him. So
Okay.
I pitched it to him in April of last year. I was backstage after a Little Steven concert in Red Bank, New Jersey, and I was there specifically to pitch this project to him. And immediately he was in. He was in immediately. So then it was just a matter of figuring out our schedules because I think the E Street Band was about to, they were like taking a little bit of a break between legs of the
Hmm.
tour, but they were going back out maybe to Europe or something. So we had to figure it out schedule wise. And then I guess it might have been in January of this year that we did a Zoom call interview, and that was almost 2 hours. And then we did a follow-up in March of this year, and that one was like an hour and 45 minutes or something. So altogether, we talked for almost 4 hours, and I had a huge list of questions for the first chat. And then I was able to go back and say, oh, what did I miss or what do I need more of and stuff. And he also he really figured where I was coming from because I was asking him some stuff that he was just like shaking his head. How do you even know that? How do you actually, when I pitched him the book in Red Bank, I thought it was funny. I was telling him that this is a real deep dive into your music, and I'm going to talk about every album and every song and every guest appearance. And I mentioned an album that he appeared on in 1985 where he sang a duet with this band on one song,
Hmm.
and he had no idea what I was talking about. He didn't remember it at all. I was like, it's a great song. Your vocals are terrific. He did not recall it. Now, in 1985, he was doing the Sun City album, so I think he was preoccupied with a much bigger project.
What do you think the biggest difference between he has written his own story? What's the biggest difference between, and had you read his book before you wrote your own?
Yeah, his book came out probably 3 or 4 years ago now.
Yeah, it has
It's
been a while.
so you're referring to Unrequited
Yes.
Infatuations.
Yes.
That's his autobiography right there.
Yeah.
There's also a version that he signed for Backstreet's Magazine.
Ah.
I think this is the Italian version of it. I was ready.
You were ready.
Dutch.
Very nice.
This is going to take a while. German, the different cover.
Nice.
Spanish. or
Very cool.
from Mexican. A paperback. This one has all kinds of like notes and stuff.
Yeah,
And then finally the audiobook,
nice.
which is read by him. So yeah, I read it.
What's funny is I bought Bruce's autobiography, then went to the book signing in Austin, so I got a second copy of the book with him signed. Then, of course, I bought the paperback and I bought the audio version because I wanted to hear Bruce tell the story. So I'm right there with you. I
Right.
understand. Yes.
So the difference, back to your original question, his book is like a straight up autobiography. He
Yeah.
talks about him in Southside struggling in the clubs and him getting snuck into South Africa to meet with all these leaders and stuff. Whereas I might touch on some of that kind of stuff, but I definitely go deeper into his music than he does. Um, and that's probably just because I know more about his music than he does. He creates it and then he just goes off and does another project where I'm studying every line and every lyric and all this kind of crap. Um, so mine is if you like his book and you're interested in knowing more about his career and more about his music, then that's where my book is going to take you because I talk about almost every guest appearance he ever did and every chapter I definitely talk about a few bootlegs and notable live concerts. So I think it really paints a very detailed picture of his definitely his complete musical career. There's also a chapter on Sopranos and there's a chapter about Lilyhammer. So I touch on those things too.
Do I, and this is more just I'd like your comments. I have a podcast with some friends of mine. We're going through Babylon 5. They had never seen it, and so I've seen it, and so we're going through that. But also for fun, Lou, Karen, and I rotate picking something that we'll talk about, and we'll just pick a series. And so I picked the Little Steven documentary that was coming out just a few months ago, and they're both just casual fans of Bruce, and both of them were amazed at his life. They were like, "Oh yeah, that's that guy that was on The Sopranos," and "Oh
Right.
yeah, he's played with Bruce." And they both were like, "Oh my goodness, what a fascinating life he's had." I do think people who are Springsteen fans or Little Steven fans, we understand that, but I don't think the bigger audience, rock audience, understands that. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I agree. I'm constantly surprised that there are people who don't know that the guitar player from the E Street Band was on The Sopranos, and vice versa, that the guy in Sopranos is a musician at all. I thought that was common knowledge. I thought everybody knew that. That's always a surprise to me. The documentary is really opening up a lot of people's eyes about that, and it's great that HBO that they invested the time and the money into it. The director, Bill Tech, is a friend of mine. And Steven actually invited me down to see the premiere of the movie at the Tribeca Film Festival in June of this year. So I saw it at the same time that everybody saw it for the very first time, including Steven. And like his book, the documentary goes deep into a lot of stuff. Of course, it's very long and they have to cover a lot of stuff. I feel that what I said about Steven's book, mine being like the next thing to check out. If you really love the documentary, my book is definitely the next thing to check out. When I was watching the documentary, I was almost like, they're telling this the same way that I tell it. But we have different audiences. Like you need to know maybe you need to see the documentary. Like if you don't know anything about Steven, my book might be too deep in
Right.
the minutia, you know. When Bill Tech and I talk, in his documentary, he's got like Bruce and Bono and Peter Gabriel and Eddie Vedder and all these big names that he talks to. I like talking to the people who most people don't talk to. I want to hear those stories. I want to hear what those guys think. So for me, getting almost every member of the 82, 83 Disciples of Soul That's a really big deal for me. I interviewed all five members of the 1989 Revolution Disciples of Soul. Most people don't even know those guys' names.
Yeah,
So some of the people that I reach out to, their response is like, "Why do you want to talk to me? Nobody ever wants to talk to me." I'm like, "That's why I want to talk to you,
sure.
because you have your story hasn't been told, or just your version of your story." For me, getting, I don't know if everybody knows these names, but like getting Rusty Cloud and Jean Beauvoir and Mark Pender and La Bamba and then even more kind of recent guys. In 1986, Steven played a big benefit concert at Giant Stadium for Amnesty International. There's like 15, I don't know, 18 people on that stage. It took me years to figure out the names of every single person on that stage. And some of the people on that stage only played with him at that benefit, and I wanted to talk to them.
The I know we can't get an answer for this, but I thought it was interesting in an interview. Steven talked about one, when he tours, he likes having that big band, which is expensive. I am curious, like he says, 75,000 people to see the E Street Band.
Mm,
I can't get
uh,
10% of them to come to one of my show. And it is, I think, because I'm there. If I'm going to go see, and my wife liked the Disciples show better than she did her first Bruce show. She was like, there's so much to watch. And just, it was so entertaining. She was watching the dancers and she was
sure.
hearing the music, and she knew none of the music, but she just came back and said that was so much fun. And that's just a weird kind of quirk, isn't it?
It's something that's always plagued Steven. In 1984, when he put out his second album, Voice of America, radio stations were saying, like, why would we play a record by a guy from the E Street Band when we have the new Born USA album by Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band? So that was something he was going up against. To be honest, I'm going up against it right now myself, and I'm not really happy about it. I've had podcasts turn me down. They don't want to talk about my book because they just did a review of Bruce's new documentary. And I'm like, what does that have to do with it? This is a full-on biography of Steve Van Zandt. But I think right now I'm at like three or four podcasts or magazines or media, basically, who've passed on reviewing this book because they feel like they've already done a Springsteen related thing recently.
That is fascinating, Robert, because you would think it, it just doesn't make sense that because they are separate. And I love the what if question. And I remember different interviews that Lil Steven did, and he now tells people don't break up the band, right? Yeah, just go do your solo stuff, have a lot of fun, but don't officially disband because you can always come back to it.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating to think what if, and if he says, if I'd stayed with the E Street Band, if Bruce had made him musical director, as he jokes about in this latest documentary, but what else would he had not accomplished? And I just really find that fascinating. I remember I heard early, I can't remember when, but they offered Elvis the Chris Christopherson role in A Star Is Born. And the Colonel would not let him do it because Barbara Streisand needed top billing. And the Colonel said, no, if Elvis doesn't have top billing, we're not going to do it. And I've always fascinated that if he had done that and had done as well as I think he would he have lived a few years longer because it would have given him a different shape of his career? Am I the only one that's thinking about that? Or is that something you've thought about as someone who's a biographer and a fan?
I remember being backstage with Steven in 2000 in Toronto, and he just put out like a a reissue of the Voice of America album. And in the liner notes, he talks about my solo career was a failure and I never should have done this and I shouldn't have been political and I shouldn't have. And I remember telling him, you have nothing to apologize for. Your music is what drives me. And he said, yeah, but you're the only one who cares. So, but the part about him drawing crowds outside of the E Street Band, me and my buddies talk about that all the time. We're getting together next week. It's probably going to come up. And it's exactly that point that, yeah, the E Street Band will, especially like in Europe, they're playing like 50,000 stadiums and the disciples come and he's lucky to get 1,000 people. I don't get it because it's not like Steven's a guy when you go to see the E Street Band, it's not like he's in the background that you don't really see him. He gets like the second biggest round of applause when he comes out on stage. And I think since Clarence isn't there anymore, Steven hams it up even more.
Yes.
He's always on Bruce's mic and he's always hanging
Yeah.
off of him and he's mugging for the cameras. And people love it. People just, they love to see him up there and they cheer him on and they scream his name. And then he's coming to town on his own and they're indifferent. I don't get it.
And I say this with love in my heart, and please, no one send me ugly hate. If Roy Britton was touring, I would buy a ticket immediately, right? Shit, yeah. Roy's doing a solo concert, but I get people not knowing who's Roy Bittan, right? Same thing when I went up to Winnipeg to see Brian Wilson once, and people are like, "Who's he?" He wrote every Beach Boy song. Oh, he's a Beach Boy? Yes, he is the Beach Boy, right? But Stephen Van Zandt is just weird how that worked out for him. I often feel, and I've had Maureen on the show twice and had a lovely time talking to her. Both times I'm like, you don't want to be forward and going, hey, Maureen, tell Steven that you had a good time. Have him join me, right? But it, I feel like I want to hug him and go, it's okay, man. You've had a good life. Because when he laughs about it and jokes about it, I'm like you, I would be telling him, no, think about the music you've made and how much fun. Darlene Love alone is
Sure.
something that is a blessing because he gave her that whole new voice.
Yeah. I can also tell you that just last week, when I gave him his copy
Yeah,
of the book, he actually asked me,
yeah.
is anyone really going to care this much about my music?
Wow.
I was like, Jesus, what a thing to say. I said, I hope so.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's just a thing hanging around his neck. And it's always been that he has all these great albums. He's got all this great music. He's very well respected in the industry. That's why he produces so many other people. And of course, his record label and his radio show, he promotes a lot of new bands. He
yeah,
really lives music. So I don't know why people wouldn't go to see him, especially the current 2017 to 2019
yeah,
version of the Disciples of Soul. Because yeah, that's a party, and it's a big band, it's a fun band, and yeah, he never toured with female backing vocalists before. He's got a horn section which he hasn't had it since May of '83. It's a great show, and it covers a lot of different kinds of music. It's not just soul or rock. There's a little bit
yeah,
of blaxploitation, a little bit of Latino, and all kinds of funk and reggae and like there's I can't believe there wouldn't be something for almost everybody. The Soulfire album and Summer of Sorcery album, incredible stuff. I don't know why he can't draw more of a crowd than that. And I don't necessarily want, or I really don't want people to go to his show just because Bruce is going to show up. Music, I think, stands on its own, and I don't know why more people don't know about it or don't give it a chance. The documentary, for sure, is opening a lot of people's eyes to Steven's career, and I think the book's gonna be the next step in that.
yeah, that's good. Now that it's over, is there anything you talked about that finding his new name, finding his real name? Is there anything else though that as you started doing a deeping dive that surprised you? That is there something that as you were talking to all these people that were involved, did you get stories you were surprised to get?
There was a few here and there. Again, I'm never looking for any dirt. Don't,
No, I get that.
you
Yeah.
know, I'm not interested in that. But I guess the thing that overall surprised me, and I told this to Steven on our second Zoom interview, was how favorably all these people look back on their time with Steven. And that's why I call the book Solidarity Forever. There's all these people, and there's people who have not seen him in years. They haven't spoken to him in years. They have no plans, probably necessarily, of ever seeing or speaking to him again. And they look back with nothing but fondness. Those guys from the '89 Revolution band, Steven doesn't remember some of those guys' names, I don't think. And they, all of them, to a man, they all look back. Rusty Cloud, who's on the '82 tour, really looks back and talks about the better days recording sessions with Southside Johnny that where Steven returned to produce, of how amazing those sessions were, and how Mark Pender talks about when he joined the Disciples to record the Men Without Women album. He was so poor that he was skipping meals. He was literally a struggling, starving musician. Steven would have a full like banquet from a local delicatessen during the session. So Mark Pender was actually eating properly for the first time in years. They all look back at that. His old guitar tech, who's back with him now, Ben Newberry, or his old assistant, Zoe Yannicus. I talk to both of those guys all the time, and they just love him and they love their time with him. They consider him a mentor. He's taught them stuff either about recording, about songwriting, or just about how to handle yourself professionally. I wasn't quite expecting that much love from so many of his people in his bands or done sessions. Like they really love this guy. I didn't think that they wouldn't, but I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting
Be,
quite that level.
yeah, as you said, Robert, you weren't looking for dirt and you weren't looking for people to, I don't have a good thing to say about him, but to have that universal acclaim is slick. I did want to ask you, I was watching the Letter to You documentary when it first came out, and we see little Steven working with Bruce and talking about how to do a song. And at one point, oh, that's good to know. I'm glad to do it. And I swore it you he could have been talking to Tony Soprano, to James Gandolfini. I There was just a little click of that. I go, and the more you hear about him and the more interviews you do, I think it is eerie, and I'd love to hear your thought on that, how much those two relationships, one's fiction, one reality, mirror each other.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence. He fell into that role really easily. And I always looked at him as the unofficial band leader
Yeah,
in the E Street Band. When I'd watch old footage of, I used to collect bootleg videos and stuff from the
yeah,
River and Darkness tour, Bruce is entertaining the crowd. And I would love those little moments where I would notice Steven turning around and giving direction to
yeah,
Roy or Max and stuff like that and counting them in. I just love that stuff. I'm like, see, he's the boss.
yeah.
Nobody else would look at it
And
that way.
Wind Beneath My Wings to be right, that Bette Midler song, right, where like I was always in your shadow, right? It is, but and I did love the sarcasm, like, okay, maybe music director 40 years too late, but I think unofficially he's always been, and that's another reason to really love the guy is I know he's talked about it, and Bruce talked about there was little bit of jealousy sometimes and a little thing, but overall, they have stayed best friends all through these years and being each other's cheerleader.
Yeah, in Steven's book, he talks about when he quit the band and missed the Born USA tour, and then he makes it sound like they weren't friends anymore and they were on the
Yeah,
outs and stuff like that. That's not exactly true. It was probably strained,
yeah,
but if you remember in the Born USA 1984-85 World Tour, Steven did join the band 10 times for the encore. It wasn't once or twice, it was 10. 85 is also when Bruce appears on the Sun City record. So it's not like they never saw each other for 2 years. They were
yeah,
still hanging out somewhat. Maybe some things had changed for sure. And
yeah.
like I say, it might have been a strained relationship. but it also shows that the roots went too deep, that there was no way. Because the next thing you know, on Steven's third album in '87, there's a duet with Bruce. And Bruce joined Steven twice on the '87 tour. So they were never all that far away from each other. And then before you know it, you just see them around or they're doing
Yeah,
different things. And it's notable that Steven's the first album that was recorded after he's first officially a member of the band, Darkness on the Edge of Town. He has a production assistance credit. Nobody else in the band has that. By the
right,
River album, he's fully on as part of the production team with John Landau and Bruce. And he has production credit on Born USA too. So almost from the beginning, he's more than just another guy in the band. Not that the other guys in the band don't contribute, but I think Steven always had Bruce's ear a little bit more than anyone else in the band. And I think he had enough strong opinions that Bruce valued those. Gary Talent might have some ideas about arrangements too, but maybe his personality isn't such that he's going to actually tell Bruce,
right.
No, you're doing it wrong. This is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that speaking to power. And speaking of, I did not plan on bringing up Elvis twice on this interview, but my son and I talk about if Elvis had a little Steven in his life, right? That just had not, and maybe Elvis wouldn't have heard it, but it would have been nice to have someone that's not afraid to speak truth to power.
I'm a big Elvis guy, so I'm actually hoping to watch the new Netflix documentary as soon as we're done this.
Yeah, yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. What do you think he wants to do that he hasn't done yet?
Unfortunately, I don't think. I mean, I asked him straight point blank uh, if he's going to do more disciples tours, and he just said probably not. And I really was hoping to see some more disciples. The show that I saw last June at the Red Bank Theater, the Count Basie Theater in Red Bank, that was one of the best concerts of my life. And I used to go to a lot of shows, so I was really hoping he's going to do more of that. Honestly, I think he's going to continue with Bruce as long as he can, and the rest of the time, I'm pretty confident he's going to look for more TV and possibly movie opportunities. He likes doing that. And I think especially he learned a lot from being not one of the main guys on Sopranos, but being there every
Sure.
day. But with Lilyhammer, that's when he started having more of an influence on the music and having input into the writing, input into the production, and he even directed the final episode.
Yeah.
So I think that shows the trajectory of what he's really interested in because Lilyhammer kind of starts as one thing, and by season two, he's really making it his own. There's tons of little Steven music in Lilyhammer. The music in the background is just like songs from the Freedom No Compromise album and Southside Johnny songs and Gary U.S. Bond songs. I think he really took to that. I would love to see Lilyhammer come back for a fourth season. I don't know if that's possible, but I know that the reason why he wasn't with the E Street Band when they recently did a Howard Stern appearance was because he was in LA having meetings about TV and movie projects. And those meetings were just scheduled way before the Stern thing came up, so he couldn't get out of it, and he probably didn't want to get out of it.
There was a lot of questions I saw on Facebook pages of, hey, where was little Steven? Where was little Steven? I was we went and my wife and I went and saw, like I said, the first round, and then when they were going to do the second round of tours in Dallas is when he got sick and he had to cancel. So I've only got to see him solo once. So that makes me very sad that you probably don't think he'll tour again because I would have loved to seen him again. I did want your thoughts on I did think the funniest part of the documentary was Eddie Vedder's discussion of Niels and how he felt betrayed by Niels being there instead of Steven.
Yeah, at least back in 84, 80, 85, I guess I was a little more snarky than I am now. Hopefully, I'm not as snarky as I used to be, but I used to say it took two people to replace Steven. They had to get
Yes.
a separate guitar person and a person on vocals. That's how important he was. It's just a dumb thing that a dumb kid would say. But
There's truth to that, Robert.
he wasn't able to replace, though, that trusted ear
Yeah.
that that he had previously. Neil Slofkin and Patty, they made their place known in the E Street Band as soon as they joined in '84. But I think Bruce, in a way, still needed like his buddy there. And there's a quote from him in Bill Tech's Disciple documentary where Bruce says something to the effect of, "I was having the greatest success of my life. I was touring all around the world, and it didn't quite feel right because Steven wasn't there next to me to share it with me." Like to me, that was heavy.
That is heavy. That's really heavy. That's great. So how about you? Obviously, you're going to help. You're promoting the book, and you're hoping for a lot of people get to read it because I think that's a great story to tell. What's next for you, though, creatively? What do you want to do?
I keep saying this is my last book. I don't know if there's anyone else that I care that much about or that I can devote this much time and energy to doing a project like this. And when I get shut out of like media interviews and stuff like this, I think, why do I bother with this? Like now I feel like Steven, like nobody wants to. It is a lot of work, and this one specifically, in some ways, it took me 4 years to write this book, but in other ways, I was like prepping for it for 30 years or 40 years working on it. So it'd be hard to sink that much energy into a new thing. So I'm going to really just push this one as much as I can for the next little while. And if an opportunity comes up, I'm up for it. But I think it would have to be more something that if somebody approaches me to do something. But we'll see.
Any final thoughts?
I just encourage people to learn more about Steven and check out his music. I think he has a really interesting career. There's not too many guys who have solo music and are in one of the biggest bands in the world and were on two huge TV series and has a radio show and a record label. Like he's really interesting, and his whole political thing too. Like this is a guy who helped bring down the apartheid regime in South Africa. Not too many rock stars could say they did that.
Did you read Clarence's book?
I just read that recently, actually.
The story about the Don Rio. He brought Damon Wayans to the show, and Davis, look, it's little Silvio. It's Silvio. And the idea,
Right.
wow, Bruce loved the show so much he put him in his band.
Yeah.
Yeah. Solitary Forever: The Art and Soul of Stevie Van Zandt. Available wherever you find books. I am so looking forward to reading it. I think this is going to be great. It is a perfect Christmas present for the not just Bruce Springsteen fan, not just Little Steven fan, but a fan of music. Any type of music will love this book. So let's get it out there. All right, before I let you go, though, I end every podcast with the Mary question. And what that if you are checking out Robert because you're a friend or a family member, he made you very proud. Jay Armstrong was an honors English teacher. He's now retired, but when he was teaching, he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would read it as if it was a poem, talking about the imagery Bruce uses, the theme Bruce explores, and then he would ask his class at the end of the day, did they think Mary got in the car? Robert, that is your question. In your opinion, do you think Mary gets in the car?
The last thing the protagonist says to her is it's a town full of losers. So she might as well take a chance. If those are the two things that she's weighing, yeah, I'd go with why not?
Very nice. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it so much. Continued success. I hope everyone checks out the book. Have a great holiday season. Once again, Soliday Forever: The Art and Soul of Stevie Van Zandt. Are you doing any touring? Book signings?
We were trying to arrange a launch event and we had a place planned and everything, and then I just couldn't get my hardcovers in time. The
Okay.
publisher, there was just a delay. I had the paperbacks and it just fell apart. It didn't work. But the
Okay.
place wanted to do it. I wanted to do it. We wanted to, when the E Street Band were here, they played on a Sunday and a Wednesday. So I wanted to have it in those days in
Sure.
between.
About, right?
Yeah, a lot of people from out of town, a lot of people coming to Toronto to see Bruce and the E Street Band and Steven. And I told my publisher for a year, these are the dates. I have to have the books by this date, but they got backlogged with a new printer and I don't know, all kinds of whatever happened. So it just didn't end up happening. But I'm available for people who live in Toronto. I manage a record store here and we sell the books at my store. People can come and get a signed copy. And I mail books out all the time to people, but it's available on Amazon and through the Friesen Press website, online store. That's the publisher. So you can get it anywhere. Barnes and Nobles in the States, they'll order it in for you. Indigo Books in Canada will do the same. It's really available everywhere. You can get it in paperback, hardcover, or as a ebook. It's around, but it's just trying to get the word out.
And what's the best way for someone to reach you?
I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. I use Twitter just because Steven's on Twitter and Maureen. If
Yes.
if if they ever leave, I got no point to be there, but not much anyway.
Yeah,
And like lately, my wife has me doing little videos on TikTok. That's just how we promote stuff. So you can look me up, Robert Lawson, or Instagram is Robert James Lawson. And I'm always just posting music stuff and movie stuff and Ontario craft beer stuff and always up for talking about music.
that sounds great. All right. Thank you, sir, for spending time with me. I am so thrilled. Listeners, as I said, go check out the book, reach out however you can find it. I know you're going to love it. For now, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jesse.
During the 30 for 30 Days of Springsteen episodes, I mentioned my Patreon page. And I just want to give a shout out to the people who are part of that Patreon page. They have supported the show for as little as $1 a month, and it helps pay for some of the expenses that I incur doing the podcast. So a big shout out to Amy Brooks, Randy Brown, David Kasiskas, C.K. Westbrook, Sean Poole, Dave and Jennifer Van Ebers, Kimbo Wiggins, Jeff Ulmer, Sylvan Groth, Liz Brunson, Yetta, Fernando Lozana, Steve Van Zandt, Rob Barnett, Ted Canova, Crystal Carroll, Bella Pori, John Munson, Alex Samoda, Andrew Goddard, Betsy Hodges, Levi Petrie, Elizabeth Brunson, Stephen Malio, Holly Mack, Steve Rogers, Captain America, Dale Hozak, Terry Smith, Anna Lynn, Chris Bloom, and Mary Thomas. I want to thank all of them for their help and their support. I appreciate it so much. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to do your part to support, go to patreon.com, look for Set Lusting Bruce, and we have multiple tiers where you can help it. Some as little as $1 a month, others 5, 10, $25 a month. Whatever you're comfortable sharing, I would appreciate, and it does go toward helping support the podcast. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next episode.